me start off with the first question. Could you please tell me a bit about yourself?
Well, thanks, Raj, and thanks you guys for having me on this podcast. And yeah, I've been clamoring to get on, as you can imagine. I love my actuaries, and yeah. So about myself, so I'm from Zimbabwe. I've been in the industry over 10 years or so. I started out. I've fresh out of college, I was doing reinsurance. So I've basically been doing reinsurance in some shape or form for all of my career, actually. So in Zim, I was involved in treaty underwriting and then moved on to facultative underwriting and business development as well. And then later on, I moved to Mauritius and joined Munich Re, and where I was a treaty underwriter for Sub-Saharan Africa. Eventually, I moved on and I was at ARIG, where I was doing both treaty and FAC and business development for Sub-Saharan Africa. And then that has led me to my current position right now.
Phuthi, this has been a debate for so long. Could I have your opinion on actuaries working as underwriters?
That is a very good question, Raj. I mean, I think more and more when I started out in the industry, I think even before my time, from the earlier time, underwriting has always been what they call a belly-to-belly sort of transactional business, where it's more of like managing the relationships and sort of being close to your clients and having a pulse on the market, having market intelligence, understanding, things, how things work in the market, and being very close to brokers, etc., and all of those things. Those were in the past considered to be critical skills in the business. And I think what has then happened over the time is basically what they call the risk landscape has evolved, and it's literally changed. I mean, your so-called 50-year return period losses are now becoming 5-year return period losses. And so the environment of uncertainty has not only evolved, but has become more severe and more consequential, not only to companies, but to balance sheets and to stakeholders. So it's sort of moved away from, well, if you're able to have a beer with the brokers, they can give you some insight on how underwriting rates are moving, how sort of market dynamics are happening, who's moving where. And those things usually had a direct correlation or impact to your balance sheet. To now where it's more quantification, it's like, because there's so much focus on optimally using your capital and balance sheet. And so now this is where increasingly there is a need, and we're seeing more sort of actuaries being involved in the underwriting side of it, because it's sort of like there is a cause and effect. The capital has to be optimally used in a way that makes sense. And obviously, in terms of actuarial valuation and the actuarial background, that is the necessary skill in probably quantifying risk and the whole risk assessment process. So again, that's just the background of it. To answer your question, I feel yes, I truly believe there is a space for actuaries as underwriters, because I think quantification is something that is certainly growing more importance. But I think I also firmly believe there is still space for the qualitative aspect of underwriting, and that's something I can touch on a little bit later.
Thanks for that. Just a sub-question on that as well. From an underwriter's perspective, what would your opinion be of an actuary?
Well, from an underwriter, I mean, obviously, I think we as a belly-to-belly underwriter myself, we've traditionally seen actuaries as the withholders of wealth, as they restrain our freedom in terms of risk-taking, and they're the adults in the room when all we want to do is just put 50% and 100% on everything that comes through the door. But I think in a more practical sense, really, I think my personal view of actuaries is more of sort of like a calming influence. I think what we have we have this thing called heuristics or cognitive biases, which your traditional belly-to-belly underwriters have. So these are sort of like mental black spots that we have when we approach risks. It can be confirmation bias. It can be anything from sort of like your typical biases, your cognitive dissonance, all of those things, your typical biases that we all face as underwriters when we're faced with assessing a particular risk. And so when you are faced with those kind of inherent biases, and we all have them, you also then need the involvement of an actuarial sort of or quantification sort of feel to it to help level out the playing field, because otherwise we would move through with for example, with a confirmation bias. You basically, when you're looking at a risk, you're looking at only those features of the risk that confirm your own preconceived notions of what that risk is supposed to be like. So if it's a hotel, it's like, oh my gosh, I know all hotels don't burn, all 5-star hotels don't burn down. So therefore, it is a good hotel. So I don't need to go through various amounts of information and data and statistical information for me to make my judgment on the risk. My bias tells me I should be deploying the maximum capacity on that particular risk. And this is where you need an actuary to actually just like, hang on, the data seems to show a trend here where hotels in this particular region, in this particular location, whether it's because it's close to a flood zone or etc., they're showing a great propensity to have flood losses. So we have to be careful. We have to either walk away from the risk or put in special deductibles. And so you need that quantification to sort of balance out certain biases that belly-to-belly underwriters sometimes have.
Thank you, Phuthi, for that very elaborate answer. Do you think actuaries are of any use during your day-to-day work?
Yeah, I mean, for example, in what I've just said in terms of helping to iron out biases as well. But also just obviously there's the grunt work, the data analysis that whether it's treaty or facultative, that is required, whether it's treaty or facultative, that is required to actually go through before certain risk assessment decisions are needed. So for sure, and actuaries really need to hand in glove with underwriting on a day-to-day basis, 100%.
Thank you. Can you tell us a bit about the African insurance market as of now and how it has evolved over the years?
That's a great question, Raj. So yeah, I mean, Africa is my passion. It's a market I've been involved in for quite some time, both on the treaty side and the facultative side. I think just from a macro perspective, I think what we see is Africa continues. I mean, obviously, people talk of low penetration rates in terms of the uptake of insurance coverages across the continent. And it's something that we continue to see, where across the continent, the penetration rates continue to be low. I think given, and Africa's got such a young population, but we continue to see the accessibility to insurance sort of being limited. And I think there's great potential to that. But I think what we're also seeing is with the involvement of regulators and government, we're seeing a lot of compulsory insurances, whether that's motor, whether that's pensions, whether that's on the life side, which is encouraging. I think we always feel that I think the involvement of governments and the involvement of regulators is positive, because I mean, we are in essence a business of large numbers. So the more uptake we get, the more positive it is for everyone, for all stakeholders involved. So I mean, generally, obviously, that's just from a macro perspective. When we look at it now in terms of what's recently been happening, with the COVID situation, with the renewals and things of that nature. We are seeing some hardening in the market. Though my perspective is that it's not at the same pace that you would see in other more developed countries, but it is, to be honest, significant hardening within the context of what we've seen in the continent in the past. We've never really, it's been a while since we saw this level of shift in terms. I think what you're then seeing in territories where nat cat exposure is real, and where I mentioned earlier, where your return periods are becoming much shorter. Instead of a 50-year flood, it's becoming 5 years and 10 years. You are definitely seeing reinsurers and the market responding by requiring much more risk premium to be commensurate to that exposure. And so, I mean, hardening obviously is not only in the price. We've also seen a lot of reinsurers impose wording restrictions to sort of narrow the coverages that are available. So obviously, I mean, in terms of moving forward, do we expect this to continue? It's hard to say. It's hard to tell at this juncture. I think there are also other sort of offsetting situations to also consider. I mean, there's a lot of protectionism that's going on across the continent, which is both a good thing and a bad thing, which is both good and it's a positive thing in a sense of building local capacity to retain risk. But then again, as I said, our business is sort of founded on law of large numbers and spreading risk. So I think what we would like to see as international reinsurers is some opening up of the space and allowing risks to be spread out into the international markets, because it's a win-win situation. Because I think the more risks are retained, obviously domestically, the increased pressure is on local reinsurers, local insurers, and eventually that slips back to the fiscus and is a burden on the government and the population. So that's the current situation where we are in terms of just generally in terms of market penetration and the recent treaty renewals.